Hi, guys. My name is Timo Maas, and you're listening to the Liverpool Connection podcast.
My first question for you is like your roots in music. I always like to ask what was playing in your house growing up from your mum and your dad?
Oh Christ. Uh, well, my dad was very good friends with the Beatles. Before the Beatles, actually, it was at a Liverpool game of all things. He was at a Liverpool match, and I think I can't remember who they were playing, but anyway, he was in the Kop, and there was a tall lad next to him who was watching the match, and he had a stammer, and he was trying to shout something when the game was going on, and he was frustrated and all the rest of it. And my dad noticed he was kind of so my dad said it for him, and the guy's like, "Ah, mate." So anyway, my dad got chatting to him, and his name was Rory. And after the game, my dad was chatting to him, and he says, "Listen, it's my birthday tomorrow." He says, "Oh, is it?" He says, "Oh, it's my mate's birthday. You should come round the house." So I says, "All right." So anyway, next day, my dad jumps on the bus, goes round to this Rory's house, and his mum answers the door, and he says, "Oh, he's not in." He says, "What do you mean he's not in?" He says, "He's gone out. He'll be back in a bit." He says, "But his mate's here. It's his birthday as well." So my dad walks in, and that was George Harrison, and George was 14, I think, at the time. So they realised they had the same birthday, so they had a couple of birthday parties together when they were younger. And that Rory was basically Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, and Ringo was the drummer in that band. And my dad got to know the Beatles through all of them as well. And when George started, and then of course it's everybody knows that when Pete Best went, Ringo joined the Beatles and left Rory's band. So my dad was around all of those and a lot of other bands in the 60s, really, really early on. And he also he worked at a VW garage as a mechanic, and he had a truck or a van, and not many of them had cars back then. So my dad would be the roadie for a couple of bands on a Friday and Saturday and a Sunday, and three bands would basically give me dad some money, and all three bands would play three different venues in and around the city, and my dad would drop each one off for each venue. So he did that with a bunch of them for years, the Searchers, flipping, the Beatles, of course, the Big Three, loads and loads and loads of different bands, Jerry Marsden, the Undertakers. So, there was always a lot of musical influence in my house because of that. So, the Beatles, of course, would be on. My dad was a big Elton John fan, so I knew all of Elton John stuff really young. David Bowie as well, Susie Quattro,
Oh, yeah,
you know. But he loved his country as well. He always had a bit of Glenn Campbell and things like that. And God, what is the other guy? Hank Williams and stuff. Johnny Cash. So there was always a lot of music, and he had one of those 8-track tape recorders, with the like cassettes you put in and stuff. In his Volvo, he had. So there was always a lot of influence, and then I tried to play guitar and I couldn't really get my head around it. And then I got a little keyboard, and I started mucking around on that. And we'd moved down south by this point as well. And I used to have a big reel to reel, and I used to listen to the top 40 and record the songs that I liked off the top 40. And then I'd sit on the keyboard and I'd try and figure out what the chords were so I could work out music. Didn't read music at all. And then he knew I was kind of influenced by kind of synthesizers and electronic music, or synth pop at that time. I was into bands like Human League, Nitzareb, Kraftwerk, and stuff like that. So he said, "Listen, if you want one of these synthesizers, He says, I'll buy you one. He says, but you're going to get a job. And what you earn from that job is mine when you come back and you get paid. So I said, all right. So he got me a JX3P Roland and an SH101. And then eventually I got a drum machine as it went on. But I basically did a paper round in this village, probably 300 and something houses. But these were spread over a good few miles in this small village called Great Staunton, near St. Neots. And I'd do a paper round, snow, rain, doesn't matter what it is, you know what I mean? I'd go and deliver these papers, come in, and I'd have £5, and he'd go, thanks. And he wouldn't give me 50p, wouldn't give me anything. But that was me paying him back, you know, life lessons and all that. So that was the first thing I kind of really got into. And then we moved from there to Bury St Edmunds with my dad's job. And I just finished high school at Long Sands School in St Neots, and I went to West Suffolk College in Bury St Edmunds to do hairdressing. It wasn't what I wanted to do, but at the time it was 84. Thatcher was in, highest unemployment in the UK at the time. So my dad's like, you know, I wanted to be a mechanic like my dad. You know, we always worked on cars when I was a kid, you know, and I loved doing all of that. But he's like, look, there's thousands of mechanics in England, all out of jobs right now, all fighting for the same job. You need to find something that everybody needs, you know, because this is going to be shit for the next foreseeable future. So he said, look, there's a guy I know who has a barber's shop, he said, called Terry in the town. He said, why don't you go in on a Saturday job and you can see what it's like and whatever. So, you know, I was in there just brushing up here and whatever and stuff. And then Terry started showing me some bits. And he was a really nice guy. It was him and his wife who run the business. And so when we moved to Bury, you know, I got the opportunity to go to learn hairdressing. So that's what I decided to do. But while I was doing this, I was always doing music. You know, I was always playing with mates and in little bands and stuff. And then when we moved back to the village in Loughton near Bedrock, where we used to live before we moved away with my dad's job, we moved back to the same village. So everyone I knew there I'd known since I was 5, 6, you know. And one of my mates, John Sutton and Wes, you know, they were kind of mucking around doing stuff. So I brought my gear and they brought their gear and we started mucking around and doing stuff. And of course, right in the middle of all of this was the birth of house music and everything, you know. So I was like, oh, shit. You know, and we started going out to clubs and everything else. And, you know, we're like, you know, we want to be a part of this, you know. So we started writing our own ideas and stuff. And eventually we thought we had something decent. And anyway, we went to a club, I think it was in Blackburn, Burnley, I can't remember, called Peppermint Place. And Sasha was playing there this night, and we knew a couple of mates who were pals of his. So we got in touch with him and said, listen, we've been working on this track. He's, you know, would you have a listen to it? So we gave him a cassette, and he played it at the club that night, just off the tape deck, and you know, place went nuts. So he's like, this is ace, this. So he says, what are you going to do with it? I says, well, I don't know. We're just going to kind of put it out ourselves. So he's like, you know, he says, can I do a mix on it? And he'd never been in a studio. He was only ever a DJ, you know. What are you doing, Tom? So I said, yeah. So anyway, we booked Out of the Blue Studios in Manchester, which was kind of the it place to go and record at the time. And, you know, we'd go down there, and 808 State would be in there, or, you know, Two for Joy, or other Manchester bands that we became pals with early on. And then we went in the studio, and of course, the first day we goes there, he shows up about 5 hours late because he was in bed because he'd been playing the night before. So we had a bit of a late one. And anyway, we worked on this track. And then about a week later, he said, I've been trying it out. I said, I'm not happy with it. We need to do it again. So, freaking hell. So anyway, we booked another studios in Manchester. I can't remember the name of the place. But anyway, we went in and we did another version. So we basically had these two different mixes on our original idea. And the Trapped Call came out of nowhere. And we basically put our money together from money we'd been getting from gigs, because we'd started doing gigs by this point, you know. And then we basically pressed up 1,000 records. And Sasha said, go and have a word with John at Eastern Bloc. John Berry says he'll be a bit shush. He'll be able to help you out. So anyway, we shows up at Eastern Bloc, met John, and said, you know, do you want to buy some of these records? So we told him, we played it, told him, you know, it was us and it was Sasha. Of course, John knew what was going on, and Sasha was really starting to get a lot of interest, you know. And John says, I'll buy these 1,000 off you. Can you have some more by next week? So we're like, you are? He says, yeah, these will be gone on Saturday. I said, seriously? He says, yeah. He says, how many can you get? He says, well, you know, we only had the money to get 1,000. So he's like, well, I'll give you 1,500 quid. Can you get 2,000 the next time? I said, yeah. So we, you know, had another bunch pressed up. And he said, if I keep giving you the money to make these records, don't give them to anyone else for the first few weeks, just Eastern Bloc and nowhere else. And I think they did about 7,000 just out of Eastern Bloc in the first 2 weeks. It just went nuts, you know. And then anyway, we made a bit of money by this point. I think we gave Sash 500 quid. And then we basically got a list of good record shops we knew about that were kind of the it record shops in different towns. There was like Spinning Records. There was Underground Records in Manchester. You know, then we were going up to Nottingham. We were going to Zoom Records and Flying Records in London and stuff like that. And you know, we basically chucked a load of records in a car and would drive around and do the same thing with other record stores. You know, we were dumb enough that we didn't know what distribution was. We were just driving around in John's flipping Ford Orion, dropping records off around the country, you know, but building really good relationships with all the people that own the stores. So we knew everybody. I mean, every major record store that was, you know, 23rd Precinct, Billy and all of those guys up there. You know, we met the Slam lads, just everybody, you know what I mean? So we really had this network that we built purely by just knocking on people's doors. And I remember we went to Rough Trade, and we goes in, and there's a chart on the wall, and we're like number one in this chart. So I walked in, introduced myself, got a box of 30 records, put it on the counter. And the guy's like, no, I'm not interested. It's not our stuff. Don't sell that stuff down here. You know, and there's a couple of lads in there, you know, listening. Anyway, he says, you sure you don't want it? He says, everyone else has bought them. He says, no, it's not really what we sell. He says, all right. So walked out the door, and everyone walked out the shop after me, and we sold them right outside the front door in the window while he's looking out the window. They all wanted copies of this record. So we just sold them straight to the punters there. And I was like, you freaking numbnuts, you know. And then eventually, 808 State Boys, Darren and Andy, introduced us to Ron, their manager. And Ron had a partner, Ray, who did a lot of distribution of records and stuff. So we teamed up with Ray, and he basically started, you know, shipping all the records out at that point. And you know, we'd done maybe 3 or 4 releases, and, you know, multiple times labels had approached us wanting to sign us, you know, but we were kind of arrogant and wanted to do our own little empire. We didn't need anyone else and all this kind of shit. Colin, get out of it, dog. So yeah, eventually Deconstruction came knocking, and Kev Saunderson and Mike Pickering, and Mike had been playing our stuff for a while anyway and had been a fan, you know, and he's like, listen, you got to sign to Decon, lads. He says, you know, this will change everything, you know. He says, we understand what you're doing, and you've built your own little label and your own little empire, but if you really want to go to that next level, you've got to let a proper label grab hold of this. So we had a meeting with Pete and Keith Blackhurst, Pete Hadfield, and yeah, straight away they wanted to sign us. So we agreed on a contract, signed the contract, and Love Thing was the first release we put out, and it went top 20 the first week, and then I think it went up to like 15, and then dropped back out. But you know, we had a good start to it, you know, and then to kind of give us exposure, you know, when people were the number one artist at the time on their label, and they were just doing their first Polytechnic University tour in the UK. So they said, well, listen, do you want to be the support act? And Mike Pickering insisted that we do, you know, because he was a fan and everything. So we did the first tour with them, you know, we did like six universities and whatever. And it was great exposure for us. And at the time, one of the tracks we'd done a remix of, we basically had a very good relationship with Tony Prince and all the guys, Dave Seaman and all the guys over at DMC and Mixmag. Yeah, and I'd done a couple of remixes with Dave Ralph for the DJ only thing that they used to do. That was their kind of subscription thing. And you get to request obscure records or things that aren't really popular anymore, but you get the chance to play around with records that you really admire. So one of them I did with Dave was Richard Rodgers. I can't remember the name of the track now, which we did that. And then the second one we did Loose Ends. And both of them did really, really well. And then Dave said, listen, Tony wants you to do, does Evolution want to do something? Get John involved. So I said, yeah. So anyway, John was always a big fan of Nile Rodgers and Chic and stuff. And then we asked to do Everybody Dance. So we got the masters for that. We did the remix for the compilation. And it was really just a breakdown and then the original kind of part, you know, the piano part and the lead vocal. You know, the kind of mix in and mix out was not even the same track, you know. But everybody was playing it. It was really popular. And then Deacon got wind of it. And they were like, we want you to put that in your live show with them people. I was like, oh, I don't want to do a cover in a live show. And they're like, look, trust me, just do it. So we started doing the remix live. And it just fucking went off. And they went, it's your next single. I'm like, no, we don't want to do that. And they're like, it's your next single. Sorry, lads, it's your next single. So they said, well, the way we can get around it is we do it as a 4-track EP. So 3 original tracks and the title track, which is Everybody Dance, which means we only have to give them 100% of 25% of the sale of the EP because there's 4 songs on it. We're not just giving it all away, but that track will carry the whole thing. So we said, okay, we agreed to do it. So we went in, we recorded it with Yvonne Shelton, who was the singer with us, and we were in out of the blue studios in Manchester, working with our friend Adam Lesser, who was the guy who owned it. He was kind of engineering a lot of our stuff as well, and Mark Stagg as well at the time, and that was the highest climbing single of that week in the charts. So of course we got the phone call, you're on Top of the Pops. So, oh, friggin' hell. So anyway, we had to go down the following week on the Tuesday. We went down the Monday night. Tuesday, we had to go to, I think it was, I can't even, is it Elwood? I think it is. I can't remember, Melwood or whatever. Studios in London. And that's where they do EastEnders. So, you know, the whole EastEnders set and all the bloody rest of it. Anyway, we go down. And that week, New Order were releasing Republic. So Rob Gretton, who we knew from the Hacienda and everything, and the New Order boys, we knew Pete quite well, Pete Hogg. So we're all hanging out round there, and then Take That were also on, and I think Gabrielle was number 1 at the time with Dreams. Anyway, normally when they do the show, they do 3 rehearsals. They do the rehearsal for the lighting, they do the rehearsal for the cameraman, and then they shoot it. Then it's the final shot, and they have a small crowd in there that's in during the shot, and they move these kids around, you know, as they go to different stages. But on this particular thing, they were going to do New Order and then us back to back as one shot. So they video the whole thing, and then the camera would pan straight to us, and then we're on. So we had to go directly after them. There was no cut or anything like that. So they do their bit, pans over and comes to us. Anyway, during the rehearsal for the lighting, they do their bit, pans around, we start. And then John looks over to me and he's like, Barry, you're on fire. I went, what? He says, there's a light behind you. I think it's on fire. So I turned around, and the coloured gel that was over the light had touched the light bulb, melted, and had caught fire. So there's a guy right in front of me with the camera, video, and I said, excuse me, mate. It's like, what? You know, the music's going. We're supposed to be doing our thing, you know. I says, this is on fire. This light back here. He says, oh, that's lighting and camera crew. And walked off. So I'm like, well, hold on a minute. So anyway, eventually someone sees it. There's smoke going up. By this time, the curtain behind our stage was catching fire as well. So they evacuated the whole bloody building. And for the next 3 or 4 hours, the fire department were there clearing smoke out. The whole thing stopped. So we ended up going to a pub with New Order and Take That. And a couple of us decided to have a game of pool against Take That. And of course, there's a wager. And Peter Hook's playing. And of course, they lose. And Take That win the bet. So Bucky by this time is really pissed off. He got beat by a boy band. And eventually we gets back and we're in the canteen area, and kind of Bianca and Ricky and all the cast of EastEnders are all in there having food as well, chatting to us and all. It was just such a surreal day. And eventually we go in and we finally record it and it's all done. But yeah, it was really mad. But because Take That were there, I mean, they were the it thing at the time. And there was thousands of fans outside the studio. And we're in a limousine, of course, because the record company make you feel, you know, special and all the rest of it. Coming. So we leave the studio, and we are followed by a convoy of fans all the way through London back to our hotel room, and they all pull up outside the hotel room, and there's cameras and all kinds of shit, and we get out and they realize they'd followed the wrong limo. It wasn't Take That. They all turned around and pissed off.
There goes your ego.
Oh God, yeah, no, it was hilarious, man. Honestly, we had such a good laugh with everyone. It was a really, really fun day. But yeah, just it was mad. It was Manchester was representing for the day. You know what I mean? Between us, New Order, and the Take That lads, it was a lot of Northerners in the studio that day. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's, you know, when you grow up in the UK, like Top of the Pops is part of your life. You know, you watch it. But
it's the ultimate goal. You know what I mean? I think if you get on it, you feel like you've accomplished something, because you watch it as a kid growing up, and you know, when we finally got the call on that opportunity was there. I mean, it was a real affirmation of all the hard work for years, learning what we do and proving that we can be up there with anyone. You know, it was mad. You know, Sasha got to do it. I remember Sasha doing it with Marie when he did Biaz one. He was so uncomfortable because that's not his environment. He said he'd never do anything like that again. But you got to do it because, you know, we were the stars of the moment with what was going on and the whole movement. And, you know, like Ian, our friend from True Frequency, he was on there with his stuff, with Dancing Divas as well. You know, the Bizarre Ink lads, you know, everybody kind of knew everyone. You know, we were all doing similar venues and similar gigs. I mean, we played with the Prodigy before they really blew up. You know, it was Homeboy, Hippie and a Funky Dread, you know, Slam, just it was just mad, you know, because we were all just part of the scene sort of thing. And the mad thing with Manchester is when we moved into Juicy House, Darren from 808 State was like, hey lads, he says, where's your studio at? So we were telling him, he says, yeah, our place got robbed. So Yeah, there's been a few places. So there's this new building open on Ducey Street near Piccadilly. He says, we're going to move in there. So we're going to get a bit of a community going. So you should move in. So anyway, we went down and had a look at the place. So we moved in. So there was a guy called Gerald was in there. Nipper was in there. 808 State, Entrance were in there. Just loads and loads and loads of bands, and a lot of it to do with music and stuff. And it was great because everyone would borrow each other's gear and stuff. Do you know what I mean? So, oh, can I borrow one of your microphones? Or, yeah, I've got out of 808 State. Can we borrow that Moog? You know, and it was good because everyone would just help each other out. And it was a really, really great environment to be around. And then the guy who had the studio next to us, Simon Crompton, Crommy, he used to have a studio and it was his own business called Check Your Head. And, you know, a lot of people were working there. The Black Grape, Sean Ryder's band with Kermit, and that was all done in that studio with Simon. And then he eventually moved out, and Lamb moved in next door, you know, which was Lou and Andy Barlow. You know, when I knew Lou, because Lou used to date Jimmy from the Dubs, you know, who was originally Sub. So yeah, they were next door to us for a couple of years as well. And then the reason we moved out, and when things kind of started falling apart for us with Fluid and everything, we'd had, you know, I think 2000, 2001, the kind of MP3 piracy thing really started to hit home, and independents were losing a lot of their income. And when it was a limited stream anyway, it kind of really put a dent in a lot of people. And then there was a distribution center caught fire and some other thing. It was like, it's getting pretty bad. And we were touring in America with Jane Hanna. I think we put out Walking on Fire and the album, and then we were touring the album in the US. And we did Chicago at the House of Blues. And then I stayed because I had a couple of other DJ dates in LA, and I was doing one with Nick Warren for Global Underground. And John went back with Jane and the rest of the crew back to England. And when they got back, the studio had been robbed. We'd been broken into, and pretty much nearly everything had gone apart from the equipment we had with us on tour. And stupid me had a hard drive with 8 or 9 months worth of work on the follow-up album. And that was the backup. And I didn't take the backup home and leave it at my place before we went on tour. It was at the studio when it all went. So we lost 9 or 10 months worth of work that was really starting to sound like something special. So we basically just decided to call it a day, you know, and it was a really hard way to kind of end something, because we'd been, we'd had a pretty viable business for quite a few years, and we're dependent on each other, and, you know, it had all been really, really good, but, you know, there was a lot of outside other factors that were starting to affect everything. And it kind of changed the landscape for us. And then, you know, when I came to America, you know, working with my buddy Bill and staying at his, and then staying at Guy's, and then eventually Sasha's, you know, that was kind of the next chapter of what I was going to be doing for the next 10 years. So, but it's funny because, you know, I always, you know, one of the main things that got involved in music was to travel. I just wanted to see the world and go to places and meet people. And, you know, everything that was so special about that whole time period was, you know, we did get opportunities to play in other places, and, you know, thinking it's just a plane ticket and you get a place to stay and whatever, you know, you'd actually get paid to do what you're doing, and realizing it's a business, you know. So yeah, it just changed everything for us and me personally, you know. And we've been coming to America for quite a few years. We'd come 2, if not 3 times a year if we could do, because of the scene over here, and we were very much supported here. So I kind of had an inkling in the back of my head that at some point I'd like to stay here, you know. So when I came after everything fell apart and there was a bit sad, you know, like I said, I was here for like 8 months and then 10 months, and then realized, you know, where am I living? Am I here or am I in the UK? And, you know, that leap wasn't a hard decision to make. And then I met my wife, Katie, in New York, and then moved to LA for like a year and a half. And we were doing the whole long distance thing between New York and LA. and I was working with BT on some projects for him. And then Sasha got married, and then at the end of that year, just decided, LA wasn't a really good fit for me, and decided to move back to New York. And then, a couple of years later, we got married. So, yeah, it was.
Well, it's crazy because we seem like we're both were on the same path to come to the US.
Yeah, at some
you
point.
probably been here probably around the same time as me.
Yeah, it was 2001, 2000. I think 2003. I officially said I was here.
But it was like the heyday because I was based out of Savannah, so I would go to Orlando and Simon's in Gainesville.
Yeah,
so
I played Gainesville many times. Yeah,
I'd go to
place was insane, wasn't it?
Oh, Jesus Christ! I always have to go up to the rooftop.
Oh yeah, Boyd Westerman used to play.
Yeah, and Cuburn's Abstract Message.
Yeah,
Michael. But yeah, it's probably for me, Simon's one of the best clubs back then. Just because,
without a doubt. Yeah.
I mean, if you're on some substance, it was hard to get around. But like, I saw so many good DJs there. But like Oz, the Beecham Theatre, that's when I first saw Sasha and Digweed. But you had so much going on in the Florida scene. You had
it was vibrant as hell, wasn't it?
The Edge in Orlando, Oz, Firestone. And it just blew me away because coming from the UK at that time, and moving to the States was massive for me. But finding, my love for music again and finding the Orlando scene just brought, and the prog scene was just that was the golden era for progressive house for me.
It was. I mean, you got to look at Jimmy. It was Jimmy Van Em that introduced Sasha to America, and John and Sasha calling us up, and they're dropping tracks of ours, and they're like, "You gotta come out here, lads. They'll love your stuff." And this was probably 95, maybe 94. I think Sasha first came out. I think it was like 93. And it was just a gateway, and they loved the sound of what we were doing, and what Sasha was playing and all the rest of it. And John, it was a natural progression. And the first place I came to in America was Orlando, and it was just brilliant. It was bonkers, driving through those 3 hours or whatever it is to Gainesville. Like, where the hell are we going? The Gator capital of the world, and that venue was just amazing. Saw Tony Humphries in there. It was just. Chris, DJ3, it was such a magical scene that all of those guys were all a part of, and it was the roadmap to eventually get to New York with Twilo and everything else. It was always going to get bigger than where it initially started there, and, Jimmy, from what was going on in Orlando, he definitely had aspirations of this could be a real gateway for a lot more people, which is where his agency came from and all the rest of it. And then eventually moving up to New York, it became pretty powerful as a business and stuff, and John and Sasha getting a residence there, probably one of the most important clubs in the US, was just, it was really crazy, wasn't it? Really what it would do for them as a household name. Do you know what I mean? In America, it's crazy. And it's funny, you look back at the kind of the Delta Heavy tour, it was a success, and it was an absolute business failure in a lot of ways. But when you think about what it was trying to do, and you look at like the Fred Agains and all of these guys, Fortet and Skrillex, and the kind of things these guys where they can fill out stadiums and stuff right now, that was the real first taste of what potentially DJs could be, a touring act. And it was just too ahead of its time at the time. But the vision of what Jimmy was trying to do and the lads, they were so right. Because it was eventually going to go there. We were just too soon, too early. And the real success of that becoming a thing, I think, really has happened in the last 3 or 4 years. That's where it's become established. I mean, you look at Skrillex, Fred Again and Fortet doing, 2 nights in January or whatever it was at Madison Square Gardens, and it was sold out. I'd never even heard of flipping Fred Again up until that point, and now he's probably the hottest kid on the planet, isn't he? Really, he's immense, and he sells stadiums out 20, 30,000 people doing what he does in his own unique way. I mean, it's astounding, really, isn't it? You know.
Yeah, but
And then you look. Go ahead.
You go back to 96, 97 though, and that's where it started. And you've always got to look back, at your predecessors. And for me, you're still doing the job. Sasha and Digweed have taken it up, 10 notches.
Yeah.
The progressive house scene is still there.
It's funny, isn't it? It became a bit of a dirty word for a while, didn't it? You know, in the early 2000s and moving a bit later. But then you look at it now, it's kind of gone full circle. And, John and Sasha kind of patching up their relationship to put their brand together out on the road again has cemented, that sound and what they do, and their contribution in a lot of ways to the scene is as healthy now and as vibrant now as it probably has ever been, and that's pretty amazing to watch. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
oh, it is. I mean, again, massive difference, obviously, with, as you know, as a DJ, you used to go to your local record store and spend hours upon hours in there just to find that one track. Well, you go on places like Beatport and you sift through the absolute crap because it's so easy for the individual to put out a track without having,
there's no filter, is there? You know what I mean?
And then you get on Beatport and they have the genres and they have progressive house, and I would click on it and it sounds nothing like progressive house.
No, does it?
To me, it's like
these guys who decide these genres and all the rest of it, they've got no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah, and it's so far removed from my progressive house.
No, totally agree.
I wanted to ask you, like, obviously you've worked with Sasha on many occasions, obviously the 2 Involver albums and the Foundation album, right?
Yeah, Foundation, yeah.
I mean, it just amazes me because that is genre defining for me. It really pushed the boundaries as a so-called mix CD.
Yeah, well, it was weird because the way that whole thing came about was we were in Florida. We'd started working on some stuff. We'd done the Uncle remix. We were doing Cirque du Soleil, which took for fucking ever, And then I think we did Faithless. And then Zoe had a big iTunes library. She's as much a train spotter for music as Sasha is. And Zoe found the Ulrich Schneif's album, Quiet Places, I think it's called, or Strange Isolated Places, I think it's called. And we were just fucking in love with it. And then On My Own, I think the track was called. And it was kind of this kind of little punky, weird synth attitude kind of thing. And Sasha's like, that could be fucking massive. It just needs some balls. So we started fucking around, just doing beats and stuff with the track. And then we reached out to him and he came back straight away. He's like, oh, fucking yeah, man. Yeah, what do you need? So he sent us all the parts and stuff over. And we mixed it and, we got it done. And Sasha's like, this is fucking bonkers. And he was doing a gig in Tampa for the weekend. So he says, oh, we'll all go up. We got a limo. It's like an hour from his house. We all drove up in a limo, got lit on the way up. Gets up there and he drops it for the first time. And the place just goes fucking ballistic. It's like a punk record, at a fucking gig, And it was fast as well. It was like 140 BPM. We hadn't played anything that fast for years. So anyway, we gets back and they're all kind of chatting and he's like, I've got to do a new mix album. Global Underground want me to do another mix album, but I can't just do what we've done in the past. It has to be something different. And somehow the discussion came up with, why don't we do an album of remixes? So he's like, fucking hell. So anyway, he mulled around with it for a bit and then And then, you know, Randy, his manager, who just kind of really started with us, started reaching out to people who he was interested in kind of getting some music off. So Sasha started to put this track list together of people or things that he really liked. Of course, we needed some new things. Some things we could do, you know, a bit older kind of stuff or whatever. So there was kind of a mixed bag. But slowly it would start to take form. And then, we kind of knew we had something about 3 months into it. Once a few things had gone together, you know, it really started to come together. And we kind of, because Ulrich Schnauz was the last track, we kind of started from the last track and worked backwards a little bit, because that was going to be the fuck off, this is the finale kind of thing. So we had to figure out, how do we get to that, you know? So slowly we started to piece everything together, and Gaiton introduced us to Ableton, which I think was version 2 at the time. And, you know, what Ableton brought to the table at that time point, nobody else was even close to coming up with a concept like that for a DAW. And it was originally set up as a DJ tool, you know, but we realized that what it could do from a writing perspective would be groundbreaking, you know. So it became the kind of the main front end of how we were putting these things together. But, you know, there was a lot of shortcomings with it and a lot of weaknesses from a DAW perspective to work in, that we knew we needed to kind of figure a way around it. So we spoke to Ableton, and Ableton said, you can rewire it into another DAW if you want. So Ableton would be the kind of the canvas, and the other DAW would be the mixer, the back end of it, you know. So of course we were Logic fans. So Ableton built us a script to allow us to get 64 channels of rewire from Ableton into another DAW, which wasn't available to anyone at the time. They built this for us that we could kind of hack it. And it worked great. So Ableton was the kind of the canvas of where we put these things together. And then Logic would be the back end and kind of mixing side of it and the automation. And it worked great. And that was our formula for what we were doing for the next few years, you know. And it was revolutionary because we couldn't have done Ableton without it. Those records wouldn't exist without Ableton, you know. Just how it allowed us to manipulate and mix these records together and get them to work, you know, was a game changer. And of course, that's when Sasha started wanting to use it as a DJ way of doing his DJ sets. And our friend John Hurahan, who worked at Soundcraft, he was an old friend of ours from Wigan, and John basically built the Maven, which was Sasha's custom controller that he had built, to basically do Ableton, and that became the next chapter of him as a DJ for the next foreseeable future, you know, which was groundbreaking at the time, you know. But it was fun putting these records together because we'd never really done anything like that. And then you've got to get them all to kind of work with each other as well, you know. Was a challenge because, you know, it kind of had to work like a DJ mix, but then it also had to be much more integrated musically to make these things fit together as a fabric, as a tapestry kind of thing, you know. And we had a lot more control doing that. But it took a long time because what we'd do is we'd figure out how we wanted to end one track, and we'd record that, so just the end, and we'd stick it in the session for the next track and build the intro to that over the top of the other one to see how it would work. And sometimes, you know, some of these records are going up 5 or 6 BPM between the track before and the track after. And, you know, you can't DJ and just suddenly do that because you'll hear the pitch go up. It'll go, what the fuck? You know, what's going on? So we had to kind of figure out ways of getting them to work and change without people noticing. And that became a challenge within itself because a lot of times when I mix, you know, I'll leave the tempo of a track I'm in, but I know I want to go up a gear. So if a track's got a breakdown where there's no beats, and there's this kind of moment, I'll suddenly stick the BPM up. No one notices until the kick comes back in. And like, all right, so we were kind of doing stuff like that to get it all to work. And yeah, you know, eventually we really came out with something that we knew was going to be a bloody game changer. Because who'd ever got 10 remixes from Sasha all in one go? It had never fucking happened. You know, it took us like 8-9 months to put it all together. And, you know, we were almost late and almost missed the deadline. Sasha had left to go on tour. And I was left with all of these pieces to put together as the final thing. So Sasha never heard the final thing until it was done. And then I was sending it off to going, what do you think? What do you think? And change that, you know. So yeah, it was pretty stressful, but we got it done. But it was mad because I got nominated for a Grammy with Bill Hamill for the Seal remix that I'd done in 2003. And then 2004, Involver was released in the September, and that got nominated the following year. So Zoe and Sasha went to the Grammys the following year. But we didn't get it because Paul Oakenfold won Best Remix because, of course, he's the biggest fucking DJ in the world. But it was a complete load of bullshit because what Sasha had done had never been done before. And the fact that they didn't recognize for what it was going to do, because no one surpassed it, really, I don't think. You know, he's done 3 of them and no one's even had the balls to try and do something similar. You know, whether he's going to do a new one, that's up for discussion. We shall see. But yeah, I mean, it really set a benchmark for him, and it got released in I think the September, and we were the highest grossing album on iTunes for that year, even though we only got released the last quarter of the year compared to any other album that year, which says if it can do that in 3 months, fucking hell. It was a big record, you know.
Oh, it's absolutely incredible. You know how like you have some mix CDs or mixes where, you know, you've got 1 through 12. You're probably only going to like about maybe 7 or 8 of them.
Yeah.
There's some fillers in there. There was no fillers on that album.
No.
Absolutely. No. From the first track to the last track. I mean, it's one where I would play the whole thing, you know.
Yeah.
I always do. If I put it on, it goes put on until I'm finished. Because it pushed the envelope, and I'd never heard something like that before. Just so well put together, you know, because there was tons of mixed CDs coming out when it came out, you know. Your granddad was putting out a mix CD, but it was
the birth of SoundCloud coming up and things like that, and, you know, Mixcloud, and everyone was putting stuff up. It kind of almost devalued the mix album a little bit because they were so readily available now. And then, you know, if you're not sharing a mix every month, you know, of what your tunes are and that lot, it became so throwaway, didn't it? And I think in a lot of ways, and I was the same, you know, I started a radio show back in 2010 that I did for like a year, 2.5 years, I think I did it for. Actually, it might have been more than that. You know, on Proton, and I love doing it, you know, trawling through all of this music and finding things that you really, really like and labels that would send you stuff. You know, it was a lot of fun, but, you know, the kind of uniqueness of you have to wait a whole year before someone brings something new out, that it became so much more devalued. But music in general has done, hasn't it, really, sadly? You know, the amount of effort and talent that goes still into all of this stuff just seems to have so little value now because there's not much of a reward on the back end of it. And I think it's been really detrimental to music and artists and musicians and everything else, you know, that, you know, it's funny. I watched an interview with this guy. He's one of the biggest pop songwriters in the US. I can't remember the guy's name now off the top of my head, but he's done everyone. Imagine Dragons, fucking Christina Aguilera, fucking everyone. This guy's got 87 billion streams on Spotify. It's just obscene. And, you know, they asked him in the interview, you must have made some money. And he went, no, I've made fuck all. I can have 300 million streams and I'll be lucky if I get $6,000. He says, if you have that on radio, it's 600,000. You know, unless you get radio play, which is such a small percentage, you're never going to make a living off streaming services, which to me is just diabolical, because you're not supporting the thing that gives you fuel, you know what I mean, which is the talent. And you know, unless something majorly changes, yeah, it's difficult, you know.
Well, it's always the people in suits that make
Yeah.
the mix, you know, which is sad, because it's the artist that makes the music. They just get shafted. It's always been like that, but it's just getting worse and worse. I mean, that's why I appreciate at least, like, you know, websites like Bandcamp, where
Oh God, yeah.
a lot of the money does go to the artist. You have the Fridays, you know, where
which they started during COVID and they kept it going, didn't they?
Yeah.
Where 100% goes to the artist, and people do buy on those days. You know, it's become a give back kind of loyalty thing. And I think, I think for you probably, and me as well, is the whole vinyl revival. It's mainly been an answer to streaming services where artists can't make enough money from this format. You know what I mean? Where if they, like back in my day, when you get a couple of thousand records pressed up, what they're going to get from those couple of thousand is going to be way more than they're ever going to get from streaming, even though they might get way more exposure. It's a dedicated fan base that are willing to part with 10, 12 bucks for an EP or whatever, that it's not just a reward for them of what they get. They know they're helping keeping that person who they admire and the stuff they love afloat, you know what I mean? And I think what we've missed out on is the vinyl revival in England's been so fucking big. There's record stores all over the place again, like it was when we left. And I haven't been there to witness any of that. And they're like, yeah, Tower Records and Virgin Records or HMV or whatever on flipping Tottenham Court Road or Oxford Street in London. You know, they all closed them. They're all open again. It's kind of crazy. But, you know, here we can go to Barnes and Noble, can't we, and spend 50 quid on a flipping, $50 on a remastered Fleetwood Mac album or flipping Led Zeppelin or stuff like that. You know, it's mad.
But the whole vinyl thing for me was just the whole package. It's the artwork as well, you know, that I appreciate.
You sit and read it and look at it and all the information, the credits, the whole lot, don't you?
Yeah, you read like the small print from back to front, you know, the gatefold ones were my favorite. You know, used to come with like a little poster or something, but I miss those days. But I do want to talk to you about, like, because it seems like you're the technical glue.
In a lot of ways.
The Refractured live as well. How hard was that to put together? Because I'm sure you've got tons of stories about that. But, you know, obviously as you know, as a fan, I watched that. Like, obviously I couldn't get there to see it live. I watched it on YouTube and it just looked incredible. But the amount of work that must have gone in.
Oh yeah.
Well,
it's funny. We you know, I'd worked on the Scene Delete album with him. You know, I hadn't worked for Sasha for a couple of years. 2012, I worked a few months on Involver 3 with him, and then he moved the whole operation to Ibiza. He was needing something else, and he was moving to Ibiza at the same time. So he let the studio go in New York, and I was only working kind of part time because I had a young son then. So I'd finished. He'd gone to move to Europe and never came back to the US, basically, to move. And he was renting out his place he owned in New York. So he called me up in 2015, and I was working at Apple retail. I was working on the Genius Bar, just part-time. You know, my wife was working in New York, so I was kind of looking after the kids. And then he called me up in 2015, and he says, look, I'm working on this album with Dennis and Dave. It's not going to be a 10-month bloody thing. We've got 3 months to get this thing done. We could really do with your help. So I was like, yeah, sure. So anyway, I had my studio in New Jersey. Dave and Dennis had their setup, and Sasha was in LA a lot of the time as well. He was trying to network in the whole LA thing to see if he can get in the LA scene a little bit, but he kind of gave up on it because it's just, he's not there to blow smoke up people's asses to get opportunities. You know, it's not the way he does business. But anyway, he was there with Paul Noel, another Scouse lad. So Paul was with him over there. And between the three studios, we could do a 20-hour day because, you know, we're in different time zones. Dave and Dennis start at 9 a.m. in the morning, which is flipping 3 a.m. in the morning for me. Mid-afternoon, I'm up and I get started and I'll work till 5 or 6. And then the guys on the West Coast would start at like noon, my time. So we do a 20-hour day. So being in these different time zones and sending stuff back and forward, we did 6-7 months worth of work in 3 months because of 20-hour days. But we pulled it off. You know, the guys had a lot of music already, ideas. Some of the stuff is things that we'd done for television and film that we submitted and they didn't use, which is why we called it scene delete, you know, deleted scenes from movies and stuff. And then, you know, also we came up with some new ideas that we needed for fillers on certain parts. Pontiac is one of the ones that I worked on with them. Cassette tape, cassette D, I think it was. And then, you know, they were doing a bunch of different collaborations with a bunch of artists as well. So there was some really, really good stuff, you know. So we put that together. We finished that. And then about 3 months later, Sasha went to see Niels Fram play at the Barbican and was just fucking blown away that, yes, he's a pianist but he's also an electronic artist as well. And watching him do, Say You, is it? I think whatever it is, or Says. Just was like, fucking hell, you know, unbelievably emotional. And Sasha got to meet the promoter, and the guy's like, you know, could you do a show here? Would you think of doing? Maybe you could do the Scene Delete album. So Sasha kind of came away. We had a meeting, and he says, listen, I've been offered a chance to do 2 nights at the Barbican. This was kind of in the August, maybe September of the year before, and the show was in May. So we had like 8 months. So fucking what? So I'm like, okay, that's a bit of a tall order. So, you know, first we started on the tracks we wanted to do in Scene Delete. And Tommy Danver was brought on to do all the string orchestration and stuff, along with Dennis White. And then my job was initially sound design, because that's a lot of what I do for Sasha these days. Dennis took over the engineering role I used to do, and has been the main studio head, and it's his studio where they're working. And of course, Dave's been a big collaborator with Sasha for a long, long time. So I was basically doing sound design, which is one thing I'm really, really good at. So a lot of the sounds we may have created on soft synths and stuff, I'd have to kind of design them for hardware, because it was all going to be hardware. So I'd have to figure out what's the best synth that can deliver this sound. So slowly I put a list together of what equipment we're going to need and what can do what sound. And a big part of Sasha's sound for many, many years has been the Axis Virus, which Charlie first introduced us 2 years ago. And it's been a massive part of his career for years. So a lot of them we'd already had. But then there was other sounds from other keyboards we had to kind of figure out. I got a DeepMind 12, which is a Behringer synth, which a lot of people kind of mocked at the time, but it was Behringer's first approach, or a first try at making an analog synth with a modern kind of slant. And it was cheap. It was like $800, you know. And, you know, there was a very love-hate relationship between the purists about it. But the one thing it had in its favor is it took a big leaf out of the way the Virus is architectured, the way it creates sounds. There's a section called the Matrix, and the Matrix is an area where one source can influence the destination. That could be like an LFO or an envelope, and it would influence what that source would do. So say you add an LFO to an oscillator's pitch, the pitch of the oscillator is going to go up and down because of the LFO waveform. So if it's a ramp, it's going to ramp up. If it's a sine wave, it's going to pulse, kind of like that, you know, sine wave. And they'd done that with an analog synth using a digital infrastructure, but it's analog. The heart of the synth is still analog, but it's all controlled digitally. And it did it really, really well, you know. So some of the sounds, one particular sound, we ended up starting to do some of the tracks for the Involver albums. You know, he's like, we've got to do some of our best remixes and some of our early stuff. So slowly the show started to come together, you know. And one of the sounds, the track Youngsters, Smile, which is Olivier Rodriguez Jr., yeah. It's this amazing sound. And when we were making the remix, I couldn't fucking figure out what this sound was or how it was done. And I managed to recreate it on the DeepMind 12, and it was so close, you know. So that became part of the crew. Of course, the Virus was in there. Sasha then got sent a Matrix Brute by Arturia, which was their huge fucking big mono synth, big obnoxious thing, but a great piece of kit. So of course we integrated that into it. Roland gave us a load of stuff to try out. Charlie was using an Arturia, an Integra 7 by Roland, which was their flagship kind of rompler sampler player thing at the time, which was brilliant. Dennis was using a Sub 37 Moog for all of the bass stuff, which is a beast, which I've got one over there, which was great. Dave's setup was really unique because Dave's not really a player, but Dave does a lot of the sound design and really weird shit that Sasha does within his music. And we had to figure, that was kind of one of the biggest challenges. How the hell do we create some of this mad shit we do in the studio with live instruments? So we built this sound design pedal board using guitar pedals and a controller, Chaos pad, mixing desk, and kind of like the way we feed stuff through a lot of our hardware in the studio, we recreated in Dave's gear. And what Dave would do is we'd send him feeds from certain instruments or outputs from whether it be Sasha, Dennis, Charlie, even the strings, or Joby Burgess, who played the live percussion. He's Peter Gabriel's guy. And Dave could take a feed from any of them, feed it through this matrix of effects, and create all this overlay stuff that's kind of in between the sounds. But it's a very big part of what Sasha's production is. There's a lot of layers that are very intricate, and we managed to get it to work live, you know. And it took a long time to kind of figure all of that out. Then we were experimenting with, you know, how are we going to pull this off? So we tried using live drum machines for the beats and all this kind of stuff. And at the time, there was a lot of sync issues going on, you know, where things would lose the clock and go out of time. Just really impractical. So what we decided to do is have a playback system, which is what a lot of artists do these days. So the core of the drums and any things we couldn't produce live were on the playback rig. So there was nothing going to go out of time. Then the bass parts were played live. The keyboard parts were played live. The strings, of course, were over there. All the additional production was on. Some of the vocals would be layered with playback stuff, but there'd also be the vocalists to kind of fatten it up, which is commonplace. So I'd say 25% of it was on the playback and the rest of it was the band, so to speak. Then we had the problem of, there's 24 tracks in the show. How the fuck are they going to remember all of this? Dave doesn't read music. Dennis does. Charlie does. Sasha didn't, you know. Sasha was having piano lessons at like 4 a.m. in the morning from a teacher that he had in Australia while he was touring, because he could play piano, but he hadn't played heavily for years, but he really needed to get his chops together. So he was doing that 3 or 4 times a week for the 6 months. And then, then I can't remember where I was going with that then. So we basically we got the whole thing together with this playback rig to figure out the timing issues. But then we had a guy that Charlie brought in, Jamie. Jamie is the mixer for oh God, what's the band called now? Snow Patrol. Yeah, he does all their monitoring. He's a monitoring mixer. So he runs the stage basically. So Jamie got the whole thing set up, and he says, well, what we should do, if we're using Ableton as the playback, why don't we give everyone a little monitor so they can see the playback? So basically we had 2 computers perfectly in sync set up. If one goes down, the other one automatically takes over, so the show doesn't cut out, and you reboot the other one. When it's up and running, it gets back in sync with the other one. So you've got, it's called a redundancy system. But what we did is the top of the playback, each musician or Sasha, David, Charlie and that would have a track, and the track would be their color. And we'd have, as the music, the playback would scroll, you'd have blocks and it'd say Sasha, you'd say what instrument it is. It's like virus pad, G major. So he knows, he's got a little inkling. So as you see it playing, you're going, oh, I'm coming in here, and then he'd start his bit, when each guy could keep up with how the show was progressing. And I ran the whole system from the side of the stage. Each of us all had an in-ear monitor, and then I could communicate with the entire stage or each of them individually. So I was kind of coaching Sash as we were going along, you ready, you coming in here, mate, you got the bass line or something or whatever else, just to give him some support, and then, he'd want to talk between certain parts of the show, and he'd give me a green light, let's go, and then I'd basically start the next section of the show, because once it's all going with a click, you can't stop it, it's playing, you know what I mean? But it worked flawlessly. We didn't have any issues with it. It did exactly what we needed it to do. Sasha was playing some other drums parts and stuff over the tracks as well. Dennis, one of the things which was quite intricate was the low step track Burma has this big stab kind of sound in the middle, and it's kind of percussive in the way it's played. So I said, that needs to be on like some pads, and you can play it, so you put each sample on each key for the whole phrase, and Dennis would kind of drum it. So that became the whole thing, and Dennis would, he'd kind of play it, and it was fucking rock solid, and Dennis is a drummer anyway, so that was kind of one concept of how the fuck are we going to do this to make it sound so right. We don't want it on the playback. It's the sound of the track, So Dennis latched onto that. Of course, Charlie played the lead line in fucking Expander. That was a fucking challenge. Yeah, I mean, that sound was originally done on an Oberheim Expander keyboard, which is where the name came from. And it's such a unique synth, and of course, nobody owns one now, and they're a fucking fortune. So one rule Sasha made, he says, we can't use any old synths. They're unreliable. We could have issues with them. Everything's got to work on something new that we can go and buy at a store if we need to replace it, and just dump the sounds in, which was a really good idea. So I tried on about 2 or 3 different synths, and eventually I managed to pull it off on the Virus. But that one sound took me a week. And it was so hard to get it to feel and play exactly the same way. When Charlie had done it, he had an old Zoom 9030 guitar effects pedal, and he had a certain sound set up, a certain effect that was on Expander, and the way it had this kind of liquidity sort of feel to it, liquid sound to it, was they kept reprinting it through this box. So you don't just hear the one sound and the effect, it's the effect layered with the effect again and layered with the effect again. And they'd all be slightly out of time, but it had this huge, rich texture. And just getting it to do that took a while as well. And it's funny, where I used to live in Ridgewood in New Jersey, the guy who was the CFO for Eventide, who makes some of the best effects boxes and have done for years and years and years, his wife was my kid's teacher at pre-K. Like, you know, what would you call it in the UK? Don't even know. Yeah, childcare, right. You know. Yeah. So anyway, so she said to me one day, she says, you do music, don't you, Barry? I says, yeah. She says, oh yeah, my husband does as well. I says, why? What does he do? She says he runs Eventide. I went, are you shitting me? She's like, no. I'm like, oh man, I've got to introduce him. And so anyway, so I met up with Ray. We became really, really good friends. And when we started doing the shows, they just released this new H9 pedal, which was kind of all of the best things they'd done in all of their classic boxes from the 80s and 90s in a guitar pedal. So I said to Ray, you know, we hammer your stuff. Sasha's got a shitload of it. Could we get one of these pedals to try out and see if it's going to help us with the show? So every single keyboard on that stage was going into an H9 pedal. So I think we had about 8 of them, you know, which they supplied for the shows and stuff. But that gave us that really rich, super cool effects that we were struggling to kind of reproduce in the show. But it was mad because what Ableton was also doing was every single piece of equipment on the stage that had MIDI, I could send program changes. So, you know, it would switch from one sound to the next for a new song. Maybe sometimes in the middle of a song, you use 2 sounds off the same keyboard. The guys just keep playing, but the sound would change. They just play the new part. And I was doing all of that from the playback rig as well. So the whole system on the stage is completely automated. And I have control of all of that, you know, and if anything fucking goes wrong, I know what, where and when, you know, and how to fix it while the show's running. So, yeah, it was complex. There was one incident that happened when Rodriguez Jr. agreed to do the show. He was very apprehensive at first. And he said to Sasha, he says, listen, I don't sing. He says, what do you mean? He says, I can't sing. I have a terrible voice. He said, well, how did you do the vocals on the Youngsters track? And he went, the vocoder. He says, that's not me. It's a keyboard. So Sasha says, how are we going to get around that? So Julie, who was Jamie's girl, she ends up being the vocalist on the show. She did a lot of spooky tracks back in the day. Julie had one of these effects boxes on the floor, you know, that you use as like a pedal, but for doing vocals and harmonies and stuff. So she showed us how you can use that. So I eventually worked out the MIDI to get the vocals to work they should do. And then we'd send MIDI from the keyboard parts from the playback system to this box. And then all he has to do, he can even talk into a microphone and it comes out vocals, you know. We sat up at the Barbican and we have 5 minutes for each artist to check their mic and make sure they're okay. I didn't realize that the cable from the MIDI that went from the playback system into Julie's pedal box on the floor that Olivier's mic was going into, I plugged it into the output, not the input. So I couldn't send it the MIDI. So the whole band starts playing with the orchestra and Olivier starts singing. And it's awful. It's like, it's so bad. And he's realized what's going on and he's not happy. Yeah, I'd really fucked up. So I realized what was going on, ran over, unplugged it, plugged it in, and I went, you're good now. And then he started and everything was fine. So, I mean, afterwards I came upstairs and says, Olivia, I'm fucking really sorry about that. I said, I I had no idea. I thought everything was good. You all right, man? He says, yeah. He says, that's not going to happen on the night, is it? Went, no, you'll be fine, bud. That was fucking me. Human error, you know. And, you know, everything turned out all right. But it was like, yeah, Sasha went, you could have really fucking killed us off then, mate.
What's your favourite song from it? Because I know for me, it's Wavy.
From the live show?
Yeah, for me, it's Wavy Gravy. Just because of Charlie's right at the end. Playing the,
we had to give Charlie his moment in the show, you know what I mean? He's been such an integral part of Sasha. And, you know, fair play to Sasha. Sasha really learned his chops, but the way Charlie played, because that was the original idea. From what I know and what I've heard of the sessions, they were working at Psalm West, and when they were doing the album, you know, Charlie had this idea, and it was that piano. That piano's even on the multi-track. They just never used it in the track. But that part is in there, and it was no one ever heard it. And Sasha's like, why don't you finish it with that? So Charlie's like, all right. And it's a fucking moment on the show, isn't it? You know, it really, really is a moment. But it's mad to think that something like that, that's a classical piece of just piano music, burst Wavy Gravy. You know, you to see where things start and where they end up with what he does in the studio and what he tries to get us to figure out. I think that's a testament, you know, that you know, the way things can be reinterpreted from something so simple to something so magical, and then go back and deconstruct it and show where it started. Yeah, it was. And of course, the best thing about when they first sent over their initial draft of Expander and how Sasha wanted to do it, slow it right down. I think it was 112 BPM from 130 or whatever it was, and do this whole kind of Steve Reich kind of, you know, no one had a clue what it was. But it's when Dave drops the in the breakdown, and then everyone goes, fuck, it's Expander. You can even hear people in the audience say it, you know. It just went ballistic, didn't it? You know, I mean, that moment for me, especially on the first night, on the Saturday night, I mean, I was almost crying, you know what I mean? I was almost in tears. Because, you know, it was just to celebrate what he's done and what we've all contributed to for the last 20 odd years, and for people to see it in the flesh, in the bones. It's not just a record, it's the real thing being performed by all of these people on that stage. It was so inspiring for everybody involved, you know what I mean? I mean, we knew it was going to be special, you know, but until the audience kind of see it and react, it's like, it's yeah, it takes you back, you know. And another moment that was key is Bell Funk. You know, the way Sasha does that little piano line when it's a different melody, and then all of a sudden he switches and he plays the melody from Bell Funk. Nowhere near. I mean, that record was about 140 BPM. It was fucking brutal. But when they did that in the studio, when he had this idea and they were playing it, we're in Shepherd's Bush, I think. Oh, no, Shepherd's Bush or Kensal Green. I can't remember, one of the two, one of the studios there. And we were sat down and he had this idea, and Charlie's like, look, you've got something there. You've got something there. And it wasn't really arranged or anything. We just had this little idea for this kind of pulsing thing that Charlie had. And then we just did it. And then he's playing it. And Charlie says, you know, throw in the Bell Funk riff. And then he just played it, and everyone was just like, oh, fuck. And then Charlie just started playing the pads underneath, and it just became this fucking thing. But it would never get to the track. You know what I mean? It would never get to Bell Funk as it is, you know, the that didn't happen until we did the second round of shows, and we did the Roundhouse. And it even comes in with the beat and the bass. You know, the fucking place went ballistic. But that show was a lot more upbeat. There was more gear to it on that one. You know, it was deliberately built to have much more of an impact. You know, and you know, opening with oh God, what's the bloody band called now? God, I can't even freaking remember. It's gone. Oh God, who's the band now? What's the first track off Involver 1? I can't believe I can't remember the guys' names.
Yeah, you're giving me brain fart now too.
Anyway, we opened up with that, you know, and that straight away set the tone. You know what I mean? It really did. God, it's bugging me what I can't remember. What Grand National? Yeah, opening up with the Grand National track. You know, it was funny because when we actually did that remix, it wasn't that far away from the original track. We kind of kept it the same tempo. We just added this kind of electronic kind of slant underneath it, you know, and this kind of pulsing sort of thing. And we used the main bass line in the main body of the track, but then a different kind of vibe at the beginning. Similar kind of thing where it switches to the track and then it drops. And in the live show, that really, really worked well, you know, to just set things up, you know. And by the time you get to Policer, you know, which is just a fucking phenomenal record, you know, it's still one of my favorites they've done in the last few years, you know. And, you know, Julie absolutely smashed that out of the park live. It was just amazing. But it's one of them. I think he's definitely up for trying to do more of this. It's just there's so much goes behind it to make it a reality. I mean, months and months and months of planning and programming and putting the team together, then pinning down the artists and the guests who are involved and stuff. You know, they were never really geared up to make money, you know, which was a mistake from his management as far as I'm concerned, because you don't put all this money and this investment to make something so special, do 3 shows and wrap it up. You barely break even, where if he'd set up and done 10, 12 shows, he made £500,000, which means it was worth doing. And the fact that it wasn't set up to go and tour, I think was just fucking stupid.
Yeah, I was hoping there was a couple of US dates, because I think it would have just...
It would have been huge in the US if he'd come here. It fucking would have been massive. But the logistics of bringing all of that here is extremely challenging. Then we were even talking about downsizing it all to just having the 4 guys, you know. But I think a lot of all the extra things that were fastened on the outside of it to make it just much more a thing, I think was what was really special about it, you know. And I know some of the people who were involved would have loved to kind of gone further with this, you know what I mean? So I think maybe it'll be something that'll come up in the near future. I don't think it's not something he's never going to do again. You know, he's only ever been a DJ, and to kind of step out of that and put on his other hat, which is a producer and an artist, he fucking loved it. It was just so special, you know, and connecting with an audience. Like I said, you know, when people get to see it for real, it's another level, you know, and he can do it. We know we can do it. But
well, for me watching just through YouTube, I was getting emotional. I can't imagine putting that show together as a punter. You know, I saw the people in the audience were just going absolutely ape shit, and you could.
Yeah. And this is the Barbican, remember? The Barbican's very civilized. You know what I mean? It's funny, the curator of the Barbican who runs the whole thing, you know, said they sold more alcohol in those 2 days than they've ever done since the Barbican's been open. Says it all, really, doesn't it? You know? It was immense. Honestly, there was nobody sat down. I mean, from the view and the stage, I can't ever imagine anyone being at the Barbican and not sat down. It was just bonkers. It really, really was bonkers, you know. And it's become the norm now. Everybody's doing it. They're doing these Barbican events. You know, everybody's kind of stepped out, and you know, I think it's great. I mean, Max Cooper. I saw Max Cooper's show there. with all those visuals and shit he does. That's fucking wild what he's doing. It's incredible.
Yeah,
You
he's
know, he's a super talented lad. He really, really is. You know, and these are the pioneers of modern day music. I mean, you know, you look at people, you know, like Mozart and Beethoven and people like that. I mean, if this was their time and they'd be doing music, I think they'd be doing electronic music. You know, and you look at Jean-Michel Jarre. I mean, he even says, you know, electronic music is the classical music of our era. And there's so many parallels with it, and how easy it is to translate something on a dance floor to a performance from an audience with strings and things like that. You realize there's just so many similarities with it, you know, without us even understanding that's what we were creating at the time, you know, but it is, you know. And then you look at, you know, I'm not going to blow too much up Pete Tong's ass, you know, but you know what Pete did, introducing that thing to the masses with the whole orchestra thing and all the rest of it. And then, you know, Dave Seaman's done it as well with Belfast, and you know, you've got Dick Johnson doing it down in Auckland and in New Zealand and stuff like that. I mean, for the 40-year-olds and older, you know, reminiscing back in that time period, but to see that done with 60 odd musicians on a fucking stage, it really does affect you, you know. It's so inspiring. But you know, you got to think back, you know, when we were all going to the like illegal warehouse parties and stuff, you know, in Blackburn back in '88 and stuff, which was that's where the seeds were really planted, that there was some revolution happening. And those records at that time period, you know, they'd be in these huge warehouses with these knocked together sound systems, and everything would just be enveloped in this reverb, echo resonating, because you're in this empty bloody warehouse, and that sound just seeped into your fucking bones, you know. And the Hacienda was like that, you know. Everything in the Hacienda just sounded so much bigger because it was such a huge building. So, you know, the seeds were already planted, and the damage was done, wasn't it, of what was going to happen for the next 20 odd years. And Christ, look where we are now, you know.
Still going strong, you know, in the right place. But I can't believe we've been talking for this long. It's crazy. and
I've been known to chat for a bit.
Oh no, it's brilliant. Don't get me wrong, and we still haven't like talked about like your music, you know, Circular Sound as well. You know, you're putting out.
Yeah, that was it's kind of when I first finished working with Sasha. I had a lot of tracks that I'd worked on, just my own stuff, but I was so, you know, built into what Sasha was doing at the time, you know, and the albums and all the rest of it. I never really focused much on myself. So when I left and I had my son, I had my studio at my apartment in Brooklyn, and slowly but surely I'd start to put tracks together. And it was a learning period for me, because I'm such a collaborator, and to suddenly work on your own stuff, and you've got no one to kind of bounce ideas off. That's a real discipline that takes a long time to learn. As much as, say, someone who does work on their own finds it difficult to collaborate, because how do you communicate with someone, you know, without pissing them off? You know, the different lessons and different strengths you have to master. But it was good. It was quite a prolific writing time for me. And I was, you know, influenced by a lot of different music at the time. And I just kept banging this stuff out for like a year and a half. And then my second son turned up, Tyler. And then I realized with two kids, you know, I had no time to myself. And then the third one showed up. We left New York and moved to New Jersey. And I don't think I went in my studio for nearly 2 years. I couldn't. I was a dad, you know, to 3 young boys, and realized I had no time for anything. So, you know, I started working at Apple just to get away from the kids and have some mental sanity, you know, not being surrounded by diapers all the time. We got a nanny, and then Sasha called out, and I hadn't done anything in a couple of years, and then asked me to do Scene Delete, and that was kind of the catalyst for me to kind of get my arse back in gear, you know. And I'd missed it, of course I'd missed it, you know. But you know, you get a young family trying to do all of that and things that you really love doing and everything else. It's very, very difficult to find time. And even now, you know, it's challenging. It's like, you know, I've been doing this 36 dB thing with Dave Gardner and Richard Ford for the last few years. We started it during COVID. It was an idea we came up with. And, you know, it's doing all right. It's going well. We just put Hernan Catanio's environment out. That's done extremely well. You know, we've got some other things coming up that are going to be pretty big in the next year. You know, but slowly that business has been kind of ticking over. But the one thing it has done is it's taken all of my time away from me doing my own stuff. So I haven't written anything in a couple of years, you know. I've done a lot of mixes for people, which is kind of how I kind of make money. You know, I've done a couple of albums. I worked on an album with an artist on Nighttime Stories, a guy called Ash Walker. Yeah, he was working on his album, and they were interested in me doing a mix of one of the tracks. So it was funny, the first track he sent me to mix was a collaboration with Lou from Lamb. So I said, oh, I know Lou. So he mentioned it to her and said, oh, you got to say hello to Barry. So yeah, that was kind of fun. So that was a fucking great track called Only Love. And they were really, really happy with how it turned out. So they gave me the rest of the album. So 2 of the tracks were already done. So I ended up doing, I think, 8 or 9 out of the 11. And then Paul Glancy, who owns the label, Paul and I have known each other a long time. Of course, I knew Paul because he did the Scene Delete album with Sasha as well. And then Paul reached out to me and said, I've got this new band from London called Lavender. And they're these 2 guys. It's kind of acoustic, kind of folky kind of stuff. You wouldn't think they're from inner city London. So he sent me it over, and it sounds like an American kind of, you know, like Fleet Foxes or something like that. It's fucking brilliant. You know, not 2 dudes from London. So anyway, they were curious about me working on it. So they sent me a track that's basically 3 songs in one. It's really complicated. It's about 160 odd tracks, which is normally on average around 50, 60. So it was massive, and it was a fucking minefield. So it took about a month to figure it all out. And I did it and went back and forward with the guys, and they eventually got to somewhere where they were really happy with it. And then they gave me the rest of the album. So I've done like 11 tracks on that album. That's about to be released, I think, shortly. It's fucking great. I mean, they're really, really good songwriters. Yeah, Oscar plays bass. He's the main engineer head and stuff. And Adam is the singer, and Adam Jackson, who plays guitar. And it's great, really good songs. They listen to really obscure, strange kind of, you know, folk kind of stuff and things like Roy Kudo and things like that from like the 70s and 80s. And they have their little radio show thing they do. So they've got real strange influence and angle on music that they like, but they're just really endearing songs. And where they're at right now is they're trying to translate that and turn that into a touring band, because there's just the 2 of them. They've done everything in Ableton on their own, and there's enough places for maybe 5 or 6 musicians to make this thing a live reality thing. And I think if they get that right and they translate it to a live show, and Adam and Oscar can come across the way they want to be, I think they do really, really well in America. It really appeals to American audience, probably more than anywhere else. You know, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens with them over the next few months, kind of turning this album into a touring show, you know. And then the next project, big one I've got coming up, a really good friend of mine, Craig, the lead singer, one of the singers in a band from the 90s, the band Everything. They were big over here in like the 90s and stuff. And I've known Craig for a long, long time. And he reached out to me a couple of years ago, and he said, you know, me and the guys got back together during COVID and kind of patched up our differences and started writing again, and we're really enjoying it, and we're thinking of doing an album. So we'd love you to get involved. So I was like, okay. So they sent me one track over about a year and a half ago, which I mixed for them. and it turned out great. And they said, listen, we're going to lock ourselves away for a year. We're going to put everything else together, and then we'll let you know. So a couple of months ago, they reached out and said, listen, we're almost done. We're doing some overdubs with horn sections and strings and stuff, but the album's done. So they're going to send me over that. I think that's 10 tracks as well. So that's the next thing I'll be kind of getting my teeth into. And it's all live, live drums, bass, keys, guitar, vocals, horn sections, strings. So yeah, it's going to be a fun one to do as well, because they're really good songwriters as well. So it's good to see someone, kind of getting out there again. It's funny, I know a lot of bands from the 80s and 90s and stuff who all kind of started touring again. Steve Smith, who, lead singer out Dirty Vegas. Steve was the percussion guy in my band in Evolution years ago, after Cuzzy, one of our buddies. And then, of course, Steve went on to do Dirty Vegas. And he's been touring with Squeeze, who's his favorite band for probably the last 10 years. And Squeeze have had a huge revival the last couple of years. So I've caught up with those guys a couple of times when they've been around. I think they've just done the Royal Albert Hall. I think they did O2 Arena in London not that long ago. So those guys are on the road again. Of course, Boy George, I worked with George for quite a few years. He's been touring with Culture Club again, and he's just on a tour with Squeeze as well. So you look at prices on tickets and stuff like that. These guys are making money like they never made when they were in their heyday. So there's an audience who wants to go out and see them. I don't blame them. Why not? I mean, the shows have been great when I've seen them.
Yeah, from what I'm hearing, it's really good. Yeah, it's nice to hear that though. That they don't go off into obscurity. Because the music stands the test of time. It really does. The 80s were a good time for music.
I loved it. I still think the 80s was one of the most, for popular music, outside of electronic music. I don't think the 80s can be surpassed, really, in a lot of ways. I mean, my dad would say that about the rock and roll years, of course, but for my era of growing up, we went through ska, we had goth stuff, we had synth pop, we had electro, which was the status quo. Yeah. I mean, Talk, flipping loads of bands from Liverpool, like Teardrop Explodes and, Yazoo, Vince Clarke, Depeche Mode. It was just such a gold mine of music that was going to inspire the next kind of 10 years as well in a lot of ways. And, and thankfully, stuff that I did with Bill or with Sasha, I got the chance to work with some of these people like Depeche Mode, with Sasha for Precious, worked with Madonna, did Britney Spears, New Order. It's
Tom York, Steel.
So yeah. Tom was great. It's funny because when that came about, Radiohead had just recorded In Rainbows, and it just got released, and we wanted to do a ARP thing, Weird Fish. You good?
Yeah. Hold on.
All right. One of your kids.
Yeah, that's my kids.
Yeah, they just done In Rainbows, and Red Light, of course, helped them to kind of put that whole thing together. And we wanted to do our thing, Weird Fish, and Tom basically, said he'd spoken to the lads, and it's such a new project for them. They don't really want anyone to touch the originals. They didn't have any remixes or anything done of any of the album. Quite a long time after it was released. He said, but, if you want to remix one of my tracks, I'd love you to do one off my solo album. So we picked Eraser, and he fucking loved it. He thought it was brilliant. So, to kind of get the nod off him was really inspiring. I think one of the maddest ones for us was we worked on a Ray LaMontagne track. Now, if you know his music, he's like a soul folk guy, brilliant, amazing voice. And Sasha had been a fan of his for a long, long time. And there was one particular track, Be Here Now, that he recorded live with strings, him on acoustic guitar, at Abbey Road. And it's an amazing song. And we asked if we could remix it. So they sent us over the multi-track. And all the vocals, there's two mics when he's done it. He's got one on the guitar and one on his vocals. And we couldn't separate them. The technology to do this kind of stuff wasn't around, you know, like they did with the Beatles kind of thing and John Lennon. So there's all this bleed of the guitar all over the vocals. So we're like, what are we going to do with this track? So there's a piece of software that we use called Metasynth, which allows you to granularly stretch and muck around with sounds and stuff that we've been using for a long time. It's a big part of what Sasha does. It's kind of the opening to the first Involver album. That's all a stretch of Grand National, and it's just this ambient weird shit. And it's the vocals and the guitars and stuff. So anyway, we did that with it. And Charlie just went to town butchering the shit out of this track and just turned it into this really cool little house bubbly thing. But then there was just these weird little bits of be here now and the vocals and stuff. And Sasha's like, this guy's a fucking R&B singer. There's no way in a million fucking light years he's going to like this fucking record. Because the agreement with any of the artists that we do a remix for, they have the last say. They're not digging it, it's canned. And he thought it was fucking great. So like, holy shit. Yeah, we could not believe it. You know what I mean? We thought that was the one on the album we're going to have to pull. And we loved it as well because it's such a weird little obscure groove. But he thought what we'd done with it was just really special, just, you know, made it something it wasn't. And it almost became like a collaboration instead of a remix. We made it something else. And he says, yeah, let's just split it. So that's kind of what we did, you know. So, yeah, experimental times, God.
Well, hey, it's been an absolute honor to have you on. I mean,
lovely to chat, mate. Lovely to chat.
It's always great to, you know, have guests that are a part of my musical landscape, my musical upbringing.